Good evening and welcome to Special Assignment. I'm your host, Ashraf Garda. In tonight's episode, we join the SANDF on patrol at the Lebombo border fence as we go back more than a year later to see what has changed since the army took over the border patrols from the police. Our expose back in 2011 uncovered the human trafficking route, the so-called crime corridor between Mozambique and South Africa along 60 kilometers of the borderline. We also recently brought you a story titled Sex Slaves, where young girls were allegedly brought into the country by a powerful Mpumalanga businessman for sexual purposes. Now we explore what impact the military's presence has had in the area in combating increasing crime that ranges from arms smuggling, drugs and the trafficking of children for the sex trade, domestic servitude or child labor. A major concern back then was the border fence, which is often torn down by gangs, allowing an easy access route to launch the cross-border criminal enterprises into South Africa. This investigation by senior producer Frank Farrow.
Young children like this are being trafficked across the Mozambican border on a regular basis.
South Africa is seen as a good market for child labor, prostitution and other kind of stuff. You have children working in the streets as vendors.
The destruction of the Lebombo border fence and the lack of repairs makes it difficult for the SANDF to keep trafficking syndicates out.
The army doesn't have enough infantry to do the job properly. It does not have the money to buy the necessary sensor equipment, and it doesn't have the money to repair the whole fence in one go, or even the patrol roads for that matter, and the bases.
Raising awareness on the dangers of human trafficking has become this Roman Catholic priest's mission at Sunday Mass for this border community in the Nkomazi district.
It's very near from the Swazi border there and the Mozambican border, so that's the place where all the trafficking happens.
But some children who have been taken from their communities don't necessarily want to go back to their home countries because of the conditions there.
I feel so bad, unhappy, depressed, all those things.
In 2011, we spoke to Mozambican girls that had been trafficked for sexual exploitation in South Africa. The girls were all under 16 years of age when they were robbed of their innocence. This girl, who is now 19 years old, still refuses to be identified. She says that upon arriving, they were forced to take pictures.
Disse que era para vestirmos aquelas roupas, para tirar fotos, que era para ir na internet, para clientes verem e virem até lá.
Our investigation found the photos were posted here. It's a website that advertises sex for sale. The South African sex industry is a multi-million rand enterprise. The demand is for younger girls. Girls trafficked are often illegal, which makes them increasingly vulnerable. In our program titled Child Sex Slaves, we brought you the story of a prominent Mpumalanga businessman and a Mozambican woman arrested for human trafficking. The accused have been charged under the Sexual Offences Act for exposing the young girls to sexual abuse. In 2011, a Mozambican woman, Aldina dos Santos, pictured here, was sentenced to life imprisonment for the same crime. Aldina was the only one convicted in what police believe was a bigger human trafficking syndicate. The question remains, what sentence will Lloyd Mabuza and his alleged accomplice get if they are found guilty? Our recent investigation has found that the trafficking of young children is growing. Ronaldinho, not his real name, was smuggled across the border fence when he was only 10 years old. We have concealed his identity for safety reasons.
Como é que passaste por aqui?
Eu passou com outro homem ali.
Outro homem?
Sim.
Ok, e o que é que esse homem te prometeu?
Quê?
Essa pessoa que te trouxe, o que é que ele te prometeu?
Muitas coisas.
Ok, e onde é que foste parar?
I forgot the place.
This shelter in Mpumalanga became Ronaldinho's home when social workers rescued him off the streets. More than 80% of the children here are victims of trafficking. An anti-trafficking official says the young boy was exploited and forced to work as a street vendor.
He ended up in the areas of Nas and Tonga. That's where they were using him, where he used to sell stuff. He was working at the place there for food and everything. That's when people identified the child and the social workers intervened. That's when they brought the child to our attention.
Prosecutors say without comprehensive anti-trafficking legislation, it's more difficult to prosecute cases of child labor. Here at the shelter, social workers are busy preparing for Ronaldinho's repatriation.
They want to take me back to Mozambique
Why don't you want to go?
because here I have a lot of friends and I lack the knowledge at school.
When you arrived here, did they tell you one day they'll take you back?
Yes, but not exactly. It was like they are joking.
How do you feel?
I feel so bad, unhappy, depressed, all those things.
The thought of leaving behind his school friends and the other kids at the shelter is too much to bear for Ronaldinho, but his biggest concern is of abandoning his studies.
I believe you're a very good student.
Yes, I'm a very good student, and I think maybe I'm in position 3, 2, 1, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, what's your best subject?
The best subject is social science and natural science.
The Department of Social Development says the repatriation of foreign children should be dealt with swiftly. In Ronaldinho's case, he ended up staying in South Africa for more than 3 years. They say this could affect his reintegration. The MEC for Social Development in Mpumalanga says her department's lack of capacity prevents them from ensuring that shelters comply with the law.
It's a very difficult matter in terms of compliance of these people. That's why I said we don't have enough capacity. Because every person, if he's put in the shelter, there must be a plan of how do we deal with that person and the need analysis of that individual person. So if you find that we've got 30 people, so we must have running 30 different plans for individual peoples.
We follow Ronaldinho on the road to the Lebombo border. The road is busy with trucks transporting goods into Mozambique. At the border, we drive in to collect his repatriation papers. I asked Given Lukuleni what the chances are for Ronaldinho to complete his studies in South Africa.
It was better in South Africa. But then what can we do? We're not doing the laws. We are not coming up with whatever they come up, all the legislations that they have. Mozambican children, they say they have to be in Mozambique.
We walk with Ronaldinho to the Mozambican side of the border, but are stopped by soldiers who tell us we are not allowed to film here. We keep our camera rolling to get their reaction on tape. In 2011, the special assignment crew was arrested and our camera confiscated when they accused us of espionage. The commanding officer recognizes me instantly, but he refuses our request to film Ronaldinho's repatriation. We later find him at the shelter in Moamba. Save the Children says the reintegration process is normally successful.
This center has been working with lots of children, I will say hundreds of children. But when you visit the center, you'll find that we have now like 15, 20 children, meaning that most of the children have been reintegrated in their families. Okay? So, because this is also a transit center, so when the child comes here, we develop a story of the child and we try to identify their families and reintegrate them in the families. So the percentage is very high in terms of reintegration.
Within the next few days, it's expected that Ronaldinho will be reunited with his family in Chokwe. However, his biggest concern remains his schooling.
Why are you unhappy?
Just because the knowledge here is very poor, and here they teach maths in Portuguese, and I want to be an electrician, and I also have to learn maths more, you see. So I can't learn very well because I don't know how to speak Portuguese very well, you see.
At the shelter, we meet Dimpo, a South African girl that was trafficked to Mozambique. We have concealed her identity for safety reasons. Dimpo says she was taken from a school in Mamelodi when she was only 12 years old. Holding a newborn infant, Dimpo says she's desperate to get back home.
ante a re tsamaye Maputo. Se nna ke re ke a tseya eng, a re ke tla ke a go fa koloi. Nna ke tsamaya le yena re le two, re tsamaya re tla fika ka mo ra fihla ka kwa ka Gaza. Mosadi wa yena a vuya a fihla a re ke mang yo, a mo raya a re ke ngwanake. Mosadi wa gagwe a re o mo tseya kae, a re ke mo tseya ka kwa Africa. Nna ke re ke monna wa me motho yo. Mosadi wa gagwe a re tseya diaparo tsa gago o tsamaye ka mo, a ke go batle.
Save the Children says a recent trend is the trafficking of South African schoolgirls to Mozambique. It says the young girls are often trafficked to become brides for older men.
The history tells us that the children that cross the border are Mozambicans to South Africa. But recently we have this new phenomenon where children from South Africa are also crossing the borders to Mozambique. So this is a new phenomenon and we are working on it as well. Here in this center we do have 2 children from South Africa.
After the break, we travel to Naas, a border town which is seen as a center for human trafficking activity. This is the rural town of Naas. It lies halfway between the Mozambican and Swaziland borders. We are told that this area here is a transit point for human trafficking victims. Father Jean-Pierre arrived in this border town more than 20 years ago. He says the dire economic situation in neighboring countries has seen an increase in human trafficking.
They don't stay very long there, and then they are dispatched to Durban or to Gauteng there, where they are handed over to people, very often on the false pretense of promising a job. It has been going on for years, but now we know there is an increase in that.
It's Friday morning, a time when most kids are supposed to be in school. But here in Naas, young boys roam the streets selling food. We approached this young boy to ask what he was doing there. He says he's 12 years old and had come across the border from Mozambique to sell. When I asked him who he was working for, he became nervous and ran away. Save the Children's Abubakar Salamanji.
South Africa is seen as a good market for child labor, prostitution, and other kind of stuff. You have children working in the streets as vendors. So the reasons are various, and poverty is one of the main of the reasons. But apart from poverty, it's just the criminal mind of a human being.
Given Lukuleni, an anti-trafficking official, says Ronaldinho is one of many Mozambican children that are trafficked across the border daily to work as food vendors in the streets of Naas.
He was helped. I mean, there are people that used to smuggle people illegally to South Africa. Then he was smuggled to South Africa. That is when he started to see a way where he can go to. Luckily, he didn't take the info. He had to go to Naas, where he just got to the people that used him to sell stuff.
After drugs, humans are the most trafficked item. However, the International Organization for Migration says, with no reliable statistics available, it's difficult to establish the extent of human trafficking in South Africa.
Statistics, it has always been problematic. Of course, it's because of first, it's a hidden nature of the phenomenon of the crime, and secondly, because there is a lack of comprehensive legislation. I mean, in South Africa, but also within the region. So the systems are not talking to each other. So it's very difficult, again, to collect information, or, for example, the victim has not been seen as a victim of trafficking, but is registered in other or under other type of crime.
Without comprehensive anti-trafficking legislation, prosecutors have had to use fragments of other laws to prosecute offenders. The chairperson of the Human Trafficking Task Team in Mpumalanga says the much-awaited piece of legislation will be an important tool to combat human trafficking more effectively.
If the trafficking bill could be passed into law, it's going to make, the work of prosecutors in particular more easier, because I've gone through the bill. It's very comprehensive. It deals with this issue, and once it's passed into law, I believe we'll be able to use that piece of legislation and successfully so prosecute the perpetrators of this scourge.
But the Southern African Network Against Trafficking and Abuse of Children says it could be a while yet before the bill is passed into law. The delay has been caused partly due to issues that relate to the compensation and repatriation of victims.
We've attended a number of meetings. One of the reasons that were cited during the meetings was that government was looking at the cost implication with the legislation. If you look the victim empowerment part of it, because people would need to be compensated, and also these so-called CARA funds, where maybe there's money that was actually retrieved through your asset forfeit unit. How will that money be used in terms of assisting the victims?
Meanwhile, the NPA says the trafficking case against Lloyd Mabuza and his co-accused is going to trial in the Gaskop court next week. Victor Mafolo says he's confident the alleged perpetrators will be convicted.
For the mere fact that we have a matter that is currently before court having been identified as human trafficking, for us as the province, we believe is an achievement. And we're gonna ask the public to be patient and let the court, the law take its course. And we believe at the end of the day, this particular case will serve as a strong message to the would-be offenders out there that we are very serious about this. We really want to combat human trafficking in totality in our province.
After the break, we join the SANDF at the Lebombo border to see what has changed since the army took control of the borderline. In 2011, a special assignment investigation exposed the broken fence at the Lebombo border and the rising crime. At the time, border patrols were in a transitional phase. This as the army were about to take full control of the border from the police.
Just to show you how easy it is, I'm now crossing from the Mozambican side. Here, on top of the Lebombo Mountains, is the fence that divides Mozambique and South Africa. On traveling along here, we encounter this big gaping hole. This is an easy access point of trafficking of all kinds into South Africa.
Now, more than a year later, we decided to go back to see what had changed after the army moved in.
We've got here a company which is covering a distance of 60 kilometers. That company from the Defense Force's job is to patrol these borders day and night. They are not sleeping. They must arrest, that is, people that are trying to cross illegally. They must also arrest those that are taking through stolen vehicles from South Africa to Mozambique.
Defense analyst Helmut Heitmann says the government decided to deploy the military after it found the SAPS lacked the capacity to combat crime at the border fence.
Basically, they weren't doing the job. Whether they just weren't interested or lacked the people with the right training, the bottom line was that they were not effective patrolling the border, and the government finally decided it had to go back to the military. I think another aspect was that there are real signs that some smugglers and criminal groups are now armed to levels where they're really beyond the ability of normal police to deal with.
We joined Colonel Bobelo and his troops in the field to find out what impact the military's presence has had in this area. As we drive in convoy to the top of the Lebombo Mountains, to our surprise we noticed that not much has changed. In fact, the destruction of the fence appears to be worse than when we first filmed here. This could be an indication that criminal activity along the border has increased.
Mending of fences is a daily task of my troops. The undocumented people and the syndicates are constantly trying to cross over
to our country with this stuff, illegal stuff. And from time to time, day and night, it's a mammoth task.
It seems the time and energy spent by these troops in mending fences doesn't leave them with much time to do normal border patrols, to ensure that criminal gangs don't get through. Father Jean-Pierre is the convener of a crime-fighting initiative at the border. According to him, the deployment of troops at the border has failed to stop the traffickers.
The border is very porous, so they patrol with a car, but there must be about 20 or 30 points of entry where you can even pass with a car under the fence. So I think it's impossible. It's not efficient. It's not. The army has does not have the power to control the border. There would need to be 2 or 3 battalions really if they want really to check the border properly.
In the 80s, this fence was electrified, sensors were put in place, and battalions of troops deployed along the border as the apartheid government tried to prevent cross-border raids from MK insurgents stationed in Mozambique. Colonel Bobelo, then a young soldier, was on the other side of the fence.
Where we are standing now, in these borders of Lebombo, is where I was crossing during the liberation movement. But now the role has changed. I am now protecting the people of South Africa from this cross-border crime now, for people not to enter into South Africa. That's how the role has changed now. I am responsible to close the same gaps I was using during the liberation movement.
Sadly, liberation has now brought with it other evils, but Colonel Bobelo maintains the army has had many successes in combating crime along the fence. However, the trading in human beings remains a grave concern.
Human trafficking is with regard to undocumented persons. You see, these people that are coming in groups here, they don't come on their own. They are organized by syndicates that side, and then they are made to cross here to be taken to Joburg. That's where they end normally.
Meanwhile, back in Mozambique, Ronaldinho is about to begin his journey of reintegration into a family and a society he has been away from for years. Given Lukuleni says it's painful to see him go.
Seeing him crying, being me today, it's heartbreaking. But really, I have to do what I have to do. My work is to help the child for that short period and bring the child home.
As we say goodbye to Ronaldinho, we can only but hope that his reintegration will be fruitful, so that one day he can bring about a meaningful contribution to his country's development.
Now I'd like your comments, and you can do so via Twitter using the hashtag Special Assignment, or on Facebook or email. And I'll take your calls on my SAFM radio show. That's on Friday at 2:30 p.m. Finally, we've had an astonishing amount of feedback from last week's show titled Who Owns Your Debt?, produced by Peter Moyo. I've picked out 2 comments. Jeremy Kaiser Facebooked, "Can't believe what happens behind the scenes with home loans and banks who claim money that does not belong to them." While Mark Dings, who's an investment banker, tweeted, "Does it matter who owns the debt? What about your agreement to repay your obligation?" Well, I can tell you that part 2 on securitization should be flighted soon. And do note that you can watch repeats of all our programs via YouTube. Well, that's it for tonight. Join us again next week when we point out the issues that matter.